Are you gonna do anything?
This meeting is being recorded.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. Yay, yay. I am Patti Nesbitt, and I am one of the co-authors of a book that the Baltimore Yearly Meeting is going to be publishing soon, we hope. It is called A Tender Time, Quaker Voices on the End of Life. And this book grew out of a project that the End of Life Working Group, which is a working group of the yearly meeting, had instigated. It was originally a document that was created in the 2012, 2014 era by Langley Hill, which is a document about planning and coping with death and dying. It was primarily a booklet made by lawyers. It had some social work component, but not much. It's gone through many renditions, and the End of Life Working Group took it on 2.5 years ago, I guess, with a desire to upgrade it, update it, revise it, and make it applicable for the entire yearly meeting. It had been primarily focused on Virginia residents because Langley Hill is a meeting in Virginia. The project has been shepherded by the working group for those years, and we all contributed pieces of it. And then 1.5 years ago, we brought in a woman from Hopewell Center meeting out in Winchester, who's not only is a good friend of mine that we've known for 30 some years, but she's also an expert writer and a poet and an editor and an artist. And it took on as well as Kristen had finished with a 10-year project, if you can call it that, a 10-year life of living with her husband who had multiple chronic diseases, and he had died a couple of years before. So Kristen, as a caregiver and a crafter, masterful crafter of words, and a deeply spiritual person, joined the team originally as an editor, but she quickly became a co-author. She was a developmental editor at one point, and all of a sudden the book took on a whole new life. It is now at a point where it is about 200 pages. And the Friends Foundation on Aging learned of the project, came to our yearly meeting and asked, what is it that our yearly meeting is doing for our aging and senior citizens, senior friends? And when they learned of our work and saw the introduction, they said, we want this to go to every retirement community in the country and every yearly meeting. So I want to just welcome other people coming in so that we can incorporate you, and we're already recording and started. Welcome. Thank you. I'm glad you're here. So I want to read to you an excerpt from the introduction to the book, and you'll see that you'll get a flavor of the book itself, and then we'll go into some of the discussions, or some of the content of the book after I do this.
I can't sit on that hardwood for an hour and a half.
Oh, Anne, I'm glad you're making yourself comfortable. Thank you. Yeah, so this is from the introduction of the book. People had asked, why is this a tender time? We all eventually face that tender time when we come to grips with mortality. Why do we call it tender? The end of life is a time when you're exposed and newly vulnerable, as a green shoot is tender. But given forthright, gentle handling, you can open to growth. This is the time you can feel wounded and sensitive to touch, as a surgical site is tender. But given enough light, your spirit heals. And this is the time that tests and confirms personal and corporate resolve to love one another tenderly, to become tenders of one another. Tender comes from a root that means to stretch. And this final stretch of life will surely stretch you. Whether mortality creeps up in slow aging or rips the rug out from under you, this time calls for steady faith and loving accompaniment. In the language of early friends, to be tender meant to be open and receptive to spiritual reality. Tender was one of George Fox's favorite characteristic words, and he looked for tender people, especially during his seeking years, whenever he came to a new place. Let us walk with you in this time. Death is not an enemy of life, nor the end of love. It can be a culmination and a fulfillment of both. We want you to have the practical tools and spiritual supports you need to walk your path with confidence and grace. You can approach every step, emotional, practical, and legal, as an expression of spirit. So that gives you a feel for the language and the expansive topics that we were covering. The book itself has several chapters that are on the mechanics of aging, dying, caregiving, wills, legal materials, caregiving for family, caregiving for the person dying, friendship, friending the family and the person dying, and also expansive material on meetings and yearly meetings as what meetings can do across the spectrum of the life cycle. The appendices are very practical tools for the mechanics, for funerals, for memorials, for memorial minutes, for queries, support groups, and personal nurture, spiritual nurture for individuals. We're hoping this becomes a very useful, practical manual that can support people's decision-making, support people's sense of how to navigate these rough times. Yeah,
I just want to note that you used one of my favorite new words, which is accompaniment. It encompasses much of what you've just said, because the other people have to take on that idea, or else you will walk pretty much by yourself.
thank you. Thank you very much, Laura. And in fact, this book is primarily a pastoral care. Accompaniment is pastoral care. And it's one of those areas that friends don't address very often, at least in our meeting. And it's obvious that the need is great, even to acknowledge the needs for pastoral care for our aging, as we age and as we grow into a whole new era, facing uncertainty. So we think this is going to be fairly practical for lots of people. Thank you. And I'm glad you also raised your hand, because I realized that driving over here, I've created this sort of as a presentation, and usually I do workshops. And so I want to encourage you to ask questions, so it will be more interactive. Okay, so please do that. Interrupt me. When I was teaching, I found I really like to be interrupted, because that gives me a sense of where you are. And someone's going to tell me what's happening behind me, right? If that's the case. Thank you. Okay. Well, welcome.
I just want to add that I belong to a small group of us who call ourselves faithfulness group, and none of us is in our 80s yet. So we're not, the mortality numbers aren't high, But we decided our job was to accompany each other during this time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, let me just say, I just mentioned, it. There was issues of, there were a lot of things in the book about meetings. The meeting in Frederick meeting has a group called the Mortals. They've been meeting for 8 or 9 years together every month and sometimes twice a month. To talk about issues that are on their hearts, in their spiritual wanderings that come up. And it's been really positive to be able to validate.
Yeah.
And, basically to claim what's going on and to be able to make friends with these uncertain, unusual times. None of us have ever been old before. It's like, how do we do this well?
Reincarnation.
But I hope we have a while to go before we get there, And so how do we do it well? And so those kinds of support groups, friend faithfulness groups really do help.
Yep.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill, for the treats.
I'm saying chocolate chip, and they're not gluten free. For anybody who's gluten free.
They have all the other good ingredients, so.
Patty, excuse me. I'm on Zoom, and when people in the room talk to you, sometimes we don't get it. We don't get entirely what they're saying. I know you're sitting near the owl, but they are not. And so I hope they keep that in mind when they talk with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen.
Why don't you repeat the question that someone asked?
Okay, I can repeat the question.
That'll do.
All right, thank you. Yeah, that'd be great. Good. Betty,
I may have come in a few minutes late. Can you give us the title of the book I don't know if you finished it or it's a work in progress. And if you've already covered this, I apologize.
it's okay, Betty. Thanks for coming back because a lot of other people have just walked in. So the question was, can I repeat the the title and what its status is? The title of this book is A Tender Time, Quaker Voices on the End of Life. And it's co-authored by myself and a woman named Kristen Zimmett, who's a member of Hopewell Center meeting in Winchester. It will be published by the yearly meeting. Sometime we hope by the beginning, in the early part of 2024. We have the editing and design and layout and printing to do. So we imagine that it will be shortly after Christmas.
Great.
Let's cross our fingers. I've been revising this it seems like for years.
When it's born, you'll be just.
Then I'll have more of this to do. Which is just fine. Okay. The other thing I should say, Betty, is that it is under the care of the End of Life Working Group, which is a working group of the yearly meeting. It's a group that has currently 7 people from across 5 or 6 meetings. Actually 8, because we have a man up and a friend from Lancaster meeting in Pennsylvania too. Delhi.
I would say to Betty, since this is being recorded, we really want to hear the introduction that Patty made, because it's very moving, it's very encompassing, and it explains everything that they're doing in beautiful language.
Thank you, Donna.
So I have that if you want to look at it later. Thank you. All right, good. So what I want to talk about is what people ask, how do we do this work? It's a very common question. How in the world do you ever do this? Because it's a very frightening topic for many.
Yeah.
And what I want to say is that both Kristen and I are able to, because we're not afraid of the topic. We're both cancer survivors. We both have been face to face with our own death. And we both have recognized that it actually would be easier to be on the other side. And quite lovely. I mean, I'm glad I'm still here. But there is something that is so powerful about knowing that being able to be fully comforted in the arms of divine love forever is like, why would I want to be anywhere else? And that which we immerse ourselves in, the divine stream of love in worship, is something that the experience of cancer and going through chemotherapy and radiation and surgery, all of that crap that was really hard, it was the richest time of my life spiritually. Wow. Oh. The richest time. It was transformative. It helped me recognize there is no need for fear, period. Not that I can live without fear all the time. But when we touch that deep stream of love and worship, that's a morsel of what it's like on the other side. A morsel. And early friends lived their life and died that way, immersing themselves in the stream of love all the time. And isn't that what we're called to do again? Isn't that what we're supposed to be doing? To be truly friends of truth and love and light? Not to let any of the little crap that comes in our ways interfere with us, to make heaven on earth. And that's one of the gifts of cancer. It's one of the gifts of all chronic diseases if we allow it to be. Because it helps us face the reality that we're not just physical people. In fact, one of the advantages of aging is that as we find our limitations and our rough edges and our bones that hurt and our whatever that is in the way, it's like, we're going to get rid of that stuff. And it gives us the opportunity to say, wow, there's a whole lot more out there. And as our physical capabilities kind of diminish, the spiritual potential is more availably visible. Now that's a choice. It doesn't mean that everyone makes that choice. But we as friends can talk about that choice and encourage us to recognize that's not our physical aches and pains and not all that we are. I recently heard of somebody saying, you know, when we get together with other people our age, we have 15 minutes, that's it, for an organ recital. That's it. We're not talking more about it. It makes sense to me, you know? It's like, let's not focus on the stuff that is interfering with us being friends of love and light who are supposed to be making heaven on earth. And that's what early friends did. And that's what one of the things that cancer, the whole year of immersion, what a 2-year-old and a 7-year-old immersed me in that opportunity to recognize this is my true path. And so it's easy for me to talk about this work. It's a passion to share this story. And it's how I became a palliative care nurse, because I could no longer try to save people who were clearly dying. And it's like, wait a second, this path to dying can be a very spiritual transition if we allow it and if we recognize the reality of what's happening. And so if we support it, the way midwives support the birthing process, we can support the dying process. It's what we did for Betty Hoover over the last year. It's what we've done for many people, Nancy Poyce, many people, Kathy Wright. How many people in this meeting have we supported through their dying process?
Right now. Right now.
Rini, really?
Irene.
Irene. Yes. Well, that's beautiful. That's the accompaniment, right?
Yeah.
So Kristen and I are not afraid of this topic, and we invite you to not be afraid of this reality. None of us get out alive, and I hope that we get out alive well. So that's why we can do this work. We trust the cycle of life. We-
Patty,
Please,
Paul on screen has his hand up. I don't know if you want.
thank you. Yes, Paul, thank you. Paul, go right ahead.
Yeah, one note about the audio is that you are clear when you're talking into the mic, but when you're separate from the mic, then you have echo effect. And that's what's making it hard for people on Zoom to hear you.
Okay, so can you hear me now better, or?
Very
I mean,
clearly, when you're talking into the mic, when people are further away, you get an echo effect because of the acoustics in the room are not very good. They're bouncing off the wall. The other comment was to please check the chat. I put a note in the chat. Wondering if you've heard of
maybe.
That's what it was at the end, maybe.
I can't, I'm sorry to say, I personally can't do that, especially when you want me to be facing the microphone.
Okay, then I'll just mention it verbally and then you can check it later.
Okay,
From what I'm hearing, you have a background in palliative care, maybe as an RN.
that's correct.
And I was wondering if there are any equivalents to what London or Britain yearly meeting has, where I worked for a time, called Friends Fellowship of Healing, which is not, so to speak, ad hoc through different monthly meetings into a yearly meeting, but an actual institution that's been going on for about 70 or 90 years now. And they're specifically focused on these issues. They were quite critical, for example, in beginning the hospice movement, which sort of started in places like St. Bartholomew's in London, and then eventually spread along with halfway houses and so forth into the States by way of Canada. Maybe you could check that out a bit. There's an awful lot of publications that they do. Goes through London or Britain yearly meeting.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you. I'm gonna make a note of that and follow up later. Appreciate it.
If you have questions, my email address is there.
Thank you. Yeah, we see each other on Zoom sometimes too. Thank you. Are there other questions? Okay. All right, let me go back to, where was I? So I do want to say, before I get into some of the things that we learned specifically, that this book is a much bigger story of love. It compiles lived experiences of friends across the ages. We've looked at it from the early days of Friends when they recorded some of the dying ministry of Friends in the 17th century. And we have brought voices, Quaker voices in from all over the world. Including Britain yearly meeting from in a different source. We have prepared this book as a witness to a sacred yearning that we find friends who have been aware of it feel a yearning for more intimacy with the divine. It is an illustration also of how friends have made decisions reflecting Quaker values. And we have looked at all of the Quaker testimonies and brought them into bear to show how friends might make decisions using reference to the testimonies. It's almost a guide to how to think about particular issues. It does not, however, take stands on issues that where we feel there's no right or wrong answer. There's no right or wrong to say you should be a DNR or not.
Right.
There's no right or wrong to say you should go through chemotherapy or not. There's no right or wrong to say you should stop eating and drinking, or you should not put your battery, replace your battery in your pacemaker.
Mhm.
There is no right or wrong about any of those things. What we have, oh, and there's no right or wrong about medical assistance in dying, which is a hot issue for many people. What we've provided is Quaker Voices on how people have chosen for themselves. And encourage people to use our Quaker process to think about these things. There have been many clearness committees to decide about chemo or not, or is it my time to die? There are times when some of us just recognize, like, you know, sometimes you wake up and you go, this is not my home, I need to move. Or this is not the marriage I can thrive in the rest of my life, it's time for a divorce. This is not my time to go through this treatment, I'm gonna take the consequences. Those are kinds of things that we try to create a process. And encourage people to use our Quaker process to go deep to listen.
I have a question.
Please.
Is this like a clearness committee that your process?
The question was, thank you, it's John, right?
No,
Bill, sorry, Bill just asked a question, friends on Zoom, about, am I talking about a clearness committee? I'm suggesting that clearness committees are a piece of what some friends might find valuable. Like all clearness committees, they're there to make specific decisions. A support committee or a faithfulness circle is a different process that walks the walk as someone proceeds down a pathway with particular infirmities. Okay. There are many other possible, renditions of such matters. Okay, thank you. This book is also an invitation to help you find your own voice. The quintessential question as a palliative care practitioner is, what matters most to you? It's a very Quakerly query. What matters most to you in this situation? Is it that you want to go to your daughter's wedding in 6 months? We just watched Betty Hoover. My God, it was beautiful. She was diagnosed in August or September, I guess, last year. And what mattered most to Betty was that she got 2 things done. One is that she wanted to clerk interim meeting. And the second is that she wanted to make sure her son's wedding was a happy, healthy time at her home.
Wow.
Both of those happened within a month of each other. And then 6 weeks later, after the wedding, a couple weeks after interim meeting, she started to decline. What mattered most to Betty was to do those 2 things. And chemotherapy helped her do those things. It was absolutely the right choice for her. And I have a friend in Australia who was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer at the same time. And she opted not to do treatment at all for other reasons. That was absolutely the right choice for her. So what matters most to you? Also in the book, however, we have written 3 pages of queries of what matters most to you to help you find your voice about how to navigate the different ups and downs of this pathway. How to finish your work, how to let go of things, how to say goodbye. All those kinds of factors that are part of the spiritual work of dying. This actually, a lot of it is the spiritual work of aging. If we haven't done it yet, how do we do it? Roger,
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is the right time to raise or mention this, but very often there's an issue of guilt among the survivors after someone close passes away.
thank you. So Roger just raised the point that there is often guilt among survivors after someone passes away. One of the takeaways of this book is that if we are able to prepare for our death, both ourselves and our families, there is the opportunity for more peace and comfort with accepting reality. And when we are prepared, and when we've been able to have the tender conversations with our families and with our loved friends, it is easier both for us and for them. And so in keeping with the testimonies of peacemaking, community building, integrity, stewardship, if once we take care of those kinds of mechanics and do the spiritual work of reconnecting, making amends, forgiving, saying I love you, saying goodbye. Once we are honest about the reality, the guilt is lessened for those who are left. Not only that, it's easier for them at a time of intense grieving. It's like, well, Betty said she wanted this piece of music and this piece of music. Now, how do we make it happen? That was far easier than, now what do we do? What did she want? And so you not second guessing, not wanting, oh goodness, I'm gonna feel guilty if I didn't do it the way mom would have wanted to do it. Mom told me what she wanted. It was pretty clear. Does that answer the question? Sort of. Okay. Do you want to pursue that now, Roger?
Guilty for past occurrences or omissions that you have. All kinds of, those kinds of more abstract.
Thank you. Thank you. The comment was that Roger felt that there was another element of guilt here about those things that we didn't do, those things that we have omitted in our lives, that we didn't get to or made mistakes. And how do we address those issues? That's a huge issue. It's a huge issue. It's related to the spiritual work of living and living well now. Being honest and reflecting and forgiving. It's that's a whole huge thesis and huge topic, a weekend, if not a week's seminar. But it's a good one to notice now, because if those pieces are left undone, we still have the time to take care of them. And it's one of the things that makes for a more peaceful death. In fact, I want to say that one of the reasons people are afraid of dying is because they've experienced difficult deaths, or because they haven't grieved, or there's some things that are unresolved with people who have gone before us. And if we don't do that work of being here now in the present, then it trips us up later. And it interferes with us being able to craft our own death, our own dying process, because we're afraid to talk about it, because it's unresolved pain. And that kind of unresolved stuff of life is something that we need to deal with in the here and now. And that sort of circles back to why cancer was a gift. why congestive heart failure is a gift, why chronic diseases are a gift, because it puts us on notice. Now, not that I want to sign up and get in that line again, but it does help you recognize our limitations. And it's like, get it together, guys, before it's too late. So it's sort of I want to say that's the spirit tapping us on the shoulder, as Michael talks about, tapping you on the shoulder again. It's like, yeah, let me get the message this time. So I want to encourage you, if there are those pieces, and it's not just you, Roger, thanks for asking it. Most of us have pieces that I wish I had done it a little differently. I wonder if this person is still feeling the results of it. Although my son says, Mom, I'm done with that. It's yours now. Well, that's a helpful comment too. So the other thing I want to say is that this book is not an academic piece of work. Although the editor, who's from Pendle Hill, wants us to have footnotes, we want to comment, we want to say this is not the be all and end all. It is not all Quaker Voices. It's not prescriptive. It includes tensions. It includes the issues that Kristen and I have argued over and fought over. And it's like, oh my God, actually, there's been a few of those. And it's like, we have recognized sometimes that we just have to say, this is another voice. I really disagree with you. And so we'll put in more than a few voices that don't give you any pointers on where to go, because it's not for us. There is no way of saying what's most important to you or your family. So there's lots of differences respected across the continuum of theology, across cultural expressions and healthcare options. And I want to say too, because we're all a white group, one of the findings that I came up with that we were sort of jolted by was that our propensity as a highly educated group that has a measure of affluence, many of us have said, you know, when my time comes, I just want to be a DNR, don't worry about it. Just let me go. There are many, many people in this society and world over who have not gotten health care most of their life. It was rare when I was in the hospital here to find many African-American patients who were DNRs. And there was a temptation on my part. It's like, what in the world? This guy's got 4 organs down and there's no way he's going to come out of here alive. It's like, it would be the last thing that I would ever want to say is that this man or woman should not have CPR. And so when they're dying, you're going to take away the opportunity to get health care. For them, it would be more of an insult on your deathbed. It was shocking to me to recognize how narrow-minded and narrow-blinded I was to realize that.
It's a DNR.
Thank you. DNR is do not resuscitate. No CPR pounding on your chest to try to bring you back if your heart stops or if you stop breathing. So our book tried to respect that. We had an African-American friend from FCNL, who's the FCNL diversity coordinator, review the book to make sure we hadn't fallen into those traps. We see a number of other things like that with different cultural expressions. I one time told a patient who was clearly dying that he was dying, and his son was an imam, and he was livid. Told the doctors, get me off the case. That was something they absolutely did not want to admit. I was out of place without knowing it. Claire,
I just, the reference to the DNR issues. I worked hospice as a social worker for quite a few years. And one of the things that is really important, I think, is for people to understand though that the process of resuscitation, particularly in a frail, older body, is not like you see on TV, you know, that ribs can get broken, it can be it's not necessarily a great idea. I understand that you don't want to take the wish away from people, but I just think it's also really important for people to understand what's involved.
Claire just commented, for those of you on Zoom, as a hospice social worker for a number of years, she was recognizing that CPR can be very hard on the body, and people don't recognize that it's not as easy as it is on TV. And especially when a person is frail and it is, you know, end stage cancer or something, no matter what, when your heart stops, your heart's not gonna come back, no matter how many times or how long you do CPR, because the heart is stopped for other reasons. And even if we were able to bring you back, you still would have cancer. You know, you'd still be in liver failure. Your kidneys might still have failed. It's not the only part of the body that needs to function in order for health to be maintained. Thank you, Claire. And Donna,
Let me
please.
just mention very briefly that my primary care doctor, she reviewed my advanced directives, and she saw do not resuscitate, no CPR. And she said, I wish you would change that. I did change it. She said, I don't like that. So if these people have different views of these things, and it's
Right.
good to collect people's views and find out why.
Right.
That's all.
Thank you. So Donna was commenting that her primary care doc said, please do not do not resuscitate at this point. She disagreed with Donna. It's patient's rights. Donna's choice is Donna's choice. And it was her doctor's advice not to do that. And would any of you like me to digress a minute about that topic?
Sure.
Okay. I worked in the ICU for several years. And all of us nurses asked our doctors what they thought about DNR. Because many people in the hospitals know how hard it is on a body and how limited a success rate there is with CPR. And so there's a joke about, I'm gonna tattoo DNR across my chest. Which, by the way, the doctors in the emergency room or EMT would not be able legally to follow. But it's not a doctor's order, it's a request. It's my wish, it's not a doctor's order. Yes, but
Those doctors don't have any business. I'm sorry, there's two.
I understand, but that's the way the legals. Okay, so the comment, so in reviewing everyone's opinions on how do you feel about DNR, the doctor that we worked with, the pulmonologist, was had retired from the Navy and had done a lot of time in Afghanistan and in Iraq. And he said he wanted CPR if something happened to him the first time. But if his heart stopped a second time, he said, don't do it a second time. I personally have decided that I want to be full code as long as I'm functional.
What does that mean, what you just said?
Full code means do everything that medicine is going to offer to bring me back. I'm a functional person. I'm contributing to society. I have more things I want to do. If I go home and get hit by a Mack truck on the way and I'm crushed and I die, I want everything that medicine offers to bring me back. Okay, and by the way, you don't get CPR unless you're dead. Okay, you already are dead. That's why it doesn't matter if you break ribs.
Yeah.
In fact, if you don't break ribs, you're not going to be able to massage the heart. And you want to massage the heart because you want to get the blood to go to your brain so you don't become brain dead also. Okay, and in Maryland, you are dead if you are brain dead or heart dead. Most other states, it's just heart dead. But yes, if that truck hits me and I'm dead, I want you to do CPR. The first time. But if I have end stage liver cancer or end stage, I don't know, if I have end stage cancer of other types, it doesn't matter whether my heart stops, whether I can be brought back to wellness. I'm not going to be brought back to wellness. If it is a bridge to wellness, I want it. If I have dementia, it doesn't matter if my heart stops. My head still, and my body, the neuromuscular coordination is probably shot. Don't bring me back then, please.
Yeah. But that's about function.
That's about function and wellness.
Right.
Deborah.
So that's a reminder to us all that if we have these things written up in our health, we have a significant change in our health status. We need to go back and revisit what our decisions were at another point in our life
Right.
and understand where we are today and what's on that piece of paper we signed, 15 or 20 years ago. Yeah.
So Deborah just commented about the importance of reviewing our advanced directives. There are 5 times when you need to review your advanced directive, and they're the 5 Ds. The first is when there's a new diagnosis. The second is when there's a major decline. The third is if your healthcare agent dies. The fourth is every decade until you're 70 and then every 5 years. And the fifth is if there's a divorce.
Wow.
5 times. So it's like most of us should be reviewing these every 5 years at this point. Please.
Yes, I just wanted to thank you because I see what a complicated topic this whole thing is. And you say there's no right or wrong answers, and you can see in many instances there isn't. I mean, the medical profession really wants people to live as long as possible. But then it's up to us to think about what we want, I guess. So anyway, it's just really thought-provoking.
The comment here was that how thought-provoking these questions are, that the medical establishment offers us opportunities to live as long as we can, and we may not want to. And we have to keep reviewing what we want. It all comes back down to queries. What works, what makes best sense to us? How does spirit want to live in our lives right now? That's the question. What are we led to do in these topics?
I just wanted, something that Bill said, doctors until the last 15 or 20 years were definitely taught to heal. Their job was to save people. Nobody was to die on their watch. And I think that's something that doctors still carry, but the medical schools in the last 2 decades have been trying hard to teach what we're talking about. And I think it's important to recognize that and to maybe look for providers who have that point of view. It's not
Thank you.
only the same.
So thank you, Anne. So the comment was that medical schools are now helping practitioners learn more about being sensitive to patients and the palliative care approach about what is more appropriate and more sensitive to the wishes of the patient. Thank you, Ann. Jim?
Yeah, I have a practical question. Yeah, my husband's a chaplain. He fills out advance directives for people, walks, that's part of his job, walking through that with them. I've filled out an advance directive before when I would go into surgery. And that advance directive lives in the hospital where I had the surgery. And if something were to happen to me, but the last one I did was in Texas, if something happened to me here, they wouldn't have that advance directive. So I'm wondering, where should our advance directive live?
Your car. A 35-year-old friend said, my husband and I keep our advance directives, one place they keep them is in their car. They're in a car.
So the question was, where should your advance directive live? Because it may have been filled out in a different state. It may be in a hospital where you don't live. The one answer Barb offered was somebody puts their advance directive in the car. One copy, our primary care doctors like to have, although when we get to the hospitalists are taking care of us and not our primary care doctors. In this region, the Chesapeake region, there is a organization called CRISP. It's the Chesapeake Regional Information something patient care something, where you can put your advance directive online. And in the hospital, I used to go into CRISP and find them in the emergency room.
Very nice.
Now, the reality is that an advance directive is our wish. It is not a doctor's order.
No.
And so you might have 5 copies of your advance directive sitting in front of you at the emergency room, and the doctors are not allowed, unless there's somebody who's in the hospital who's going to bring this into bear. The doctors are not allowed to withhold treatment unless there's a doctor's order.
God. So better off to stay home. I'm serious. I'm absolutely serious.
I'm absolutely serious with the comment here is, well, it's better to stay home. You know what? If you want to go to the hospital, they'll give you all that they have. You don't go to the grocery store for a hammer. You don't go to the hardware store for a loaf of bread. If you want to stay home and not get medical care, it is within your right. Nobody requires you to go to the hospital. And if you go there, you're gonna get what they have to offer. So don't go there if you don't want what they have to offer.
I would like
don't
to
have to
make a
go.
comment. Can I make a comment?
Please.
In Maryland, there's a form called the MOST, Medical Order for Life-Sustaining Treatment. An elder care lawyer suggested I fill that out. It is signed by my doctor. And when I got it home and it asked many of the questions you're asking, it took me, in consultation with Ellen, 4 weeks to decide what I wanted.
Good.
Well, the first impulse was I needed to reflect on it. And that is a medical order, and it's on my phone. I made a picture of it. When we went to a lawyer to talk about advanced directives, she looked at our advanced directives and says, this doesn't even have a HIPAA waiver. You need new medical advanced directives. They need regular, careful, individual examination and review.
Thank you, Michael. Let me just comment on that. I'm glad you brought it up because medical orders are the essential piece and they do get tracked in the hospitals. If you have a medical order for life-sustaining treatment, that is what the emergency room physicians and the EMTs have to pay attention to. However, everyone does not need a MOST. Everyone does not need one. They usually don't do them unless the doctors think that you have less than a year to live. Now, you could have one, but you don't have to have one. At this point, it's most important for us to make sure our families know what we want, and our doctor, you've discussed it. And I love the idea of taking a month to think about it all. When I was in the hospital, like Jim's husband, Jay, I filled out a lot of advanced directives with people. It takes at least an hour. And then to fill out the most takes another hour too. It was a wonderful job for me because it's all a series of queries. And it helps people to review and think. And so I want to encourage people, you can download the MOST form from the Maryland MOST. Just put in MOLST and it'll come down on the computer and review it and take that month that Michael took with Ellen. It's a really good practice to help you understand what you want. And the End of Life Working Group and me are very willing to spend time with people to go over what these things mean. Okay, hang on, Rosalind was next, I think. Rosalind, go ahead, dear.
Yeah, I just wanted to make an observation, and this is not really necessarily helpful, but my mom had notified everybody at Friend's house when she was in the nursing home that she did not want to go to the hospital again. And the family had made it clear and all that stuff. And yet in the end, it turned out that they were not allowed to not send her to the hospital when she was, had in one, I don't know, she had two instances. I don't remember what one, the last one was when she did die, but they were not allowed to let her stay. She was in serious advanced dementia. She was ready to go for quite a long time before she did. And, but they were not allowed to let her stay home. So I don't know if there's any way to address that.
I would like to address that. Thank you. Nowadays, and that was a while ago, I don't think that would happen anymore. Because I know Friend's house would call hospice. My father was in the same situation with dementia in a nursing home in Richmond. And of course, it happens in the middle of the night, you're short of breath all of a sudden. And which probably wasn't all of a sudden, they just all of a sudden noticed it. But nevertheless, my sister gets this phone call, your father has to go to the hospital. He's short of breath, he's in dire straits. And she said, no, I don't think so. We're not doing that. No, you have to go to the hospital. No, Meg says, no, we've been waiting for the bridge to the bus to heaven. And he wants to get on that bus to heaven and not go through the ER first. And they said, well, you have to go. And if not, we have to call hospice. She said, perfect. Call in hospice.
Yeah.
And hospice was right there within a few hours. And he died a few days later. It was the bridge. I mean, it was the bus to heaven he'd been waiting for years since mom had died. And it's a really helpful improvement, Rosalind, over those days where their hospice wasn't as readily available. But I know Friend's house, when I worked at Jessa Hospice, Friend's house was called us frequently. And we were right there. It's the way hospice can be very helpful in our lives to keep us home. And so if you don't want to go to the hospital, then make arrangements. If it feels like it's getting to be time, then talk to hospice. Ask your doctor, is it time, and make those arrangements.
Patty, this is Ellen Atkinson again. I'm sorry to interrupt. But are you saying that the nursing home has to send them to the hospital unless they're under hospice care? Is that what's being said?
I suggested that is common. I don't know if they have to or not. And I'm sure different nursing homes would have different practices. But at Friend's house, I think there's a general acceptance of when it's time, it's reasonable to call hospice. Claire, you're looking at like you might have something to offer.
I just want to say that when I was working hospice, the thought that I had was that I hope that I want to let who's ever my care team know that the moment that I become eligible, and there's a possibility that I'm gonna have eligible for hospice, that I definitely want to consider it. Because, you know, I saw how people's quality of life improved when they got the hospice. And so many people waited way too long.
Right. So that Claire may had a comment here about how she would very much like hospice to be called the moment she's eligible.
Yeah.
Because they tend to help people do better and the quality of life is improved.
And then they get kicked off hospice because they're 6 months in and they're still.
Not necessarily.
Sometimes, some people graduate out because they're taken care of. Correct, correct. Okay, Joan.
Yeah, several of us here live at Fred's house, so we ought to be checking on the policies up there, today, now, and see but my father was there in 2008. We had hospice before he went to the nursing home, before he went upstairs. He had broken his hip and the protocol is to send him to the hospital. And his primary care doctor and me said no, and they didn't send him. And he died upstairs, and he's already in hospice. So that was 2008. He also had a DNR order on his refrigerator for 15 years. And he thought that was sufficient planning. And he planned, and he did a lot of things that a lot of people don't do, but he didn't do advanced directives. He didn't have any of that. And the real issues for me and our family was all the things that led up to the death, the decline, the years of, and what to do and all those decisions, so that it's not just, some people think having a DNR order, that's all you need to do.
Right.
No.
Friends, do you need me to repeat that for people on Zoom? Okay, thank you.
I was close enough.
Yeah, Gloria.
There's 2 messages in the chat. There's 3, but one is mine. You can ignore that. And Rosalind's hand is still raised.
Oh, it was just a follow-up. Okay.
Okay, go ahead, follow up then.
It was just that, it's clear that the thing at Friend's house, what happened in 2009 was, they basically said they cannot not do everything possible and send somebody to the hospital because of the fact that they could get malpractice, because other family members did not agree with what the DNR said. And so I think that was the reason that they were put in a bind, that they were legally required by, I guess, whatever their organizational things are, because they couldn't afford to take the chance of not doing something and then having family members or others come back at them, regardless of the wishes of the person.
Right.
So unfortunately, we were not on top of it to get hospice and that stuff back at that time. So I think it's up to the family to really, I think that, being in charge of making sure that there's hospice ready and getting all that set up ahead of time. It's got to make the difference.
So your mother was not in hospice at that point?
No, she was just in the nursing home. We didn't,
Okay.
we were in New Zealand, and so we didn't have hospice set up or anything.
Okay. Well, so that collaborates with what Claire offered, is that people wait too long sometimes. I mean, I'm not saying that about your family, but in a very common where people get into hospice and they think, why didn't we do this early? This is wonderful. And the benefits of hospice are really felt the longer people are in, and it protects against that kind of movement You know, and again, there's no right or wrong. But, you know, if we want to be crafting our own peaceful, harmonious death, then it behooves us to be having preparations made. Laura,
It's a quick story about someone who was on hospice, who I was the POA for, and she had never had a happy life. Her father couldn't care for her in an older age, and I ended up being her carer.
let me stop you a minute. Can you hear Laura? Okay.
She went into hospice when her doctor said to me, we have to find a diagnosis under which she can go. We decided she was failing to thrive.
Right.
She stayed in hospice for 2.5 years. She had the best treatment she ever had. She died smiling while I was singing a Christmas carol to her.
Thank you. Thank you. I love those stories. Betty.
It's a small little practical question. But it occurred to me when you were telling your story about all the nuances you were making in your DNR or in that most form. And it doesn't comport with the single line that's there. So are there options when you fill out these forms, if you're working with someone, to explain what you need, rather than just saying yes or no? How much flexibility do you have to sort of explain yourself on those forms? And does it make any difference? But the first question was really, are there ways to sort of have a few extra lines?
The question is, are there ways to allow for variations and perturbations and particularities in your advanced directive and in your most? And I want to say that the answer is yes on your advanced directive. You can fill in as many lines as you want. And you can say, you know, if this, then, if that, then. Those types of conversations that are behind those, if this, then that, really need to happen best with your family or the decision maker. I mean, the number one thing the advanced directive does is name the decision maker. If I'm unable to speak for myself because I'm either not able physically to speak or because I'm in Lululand and not capable of making a decision, then who speaks for me? And that person is it's called the power of attorney, the POA, or healthcare agent. That person is best to know your heart and soul back and forth and willing to go to bat for you. Because there are times where you have to speak up to the doctors and question and be very detailed. So don't just get your husband or your wife if they are not a question asker.
Yeah.
Ask someone who's not afraid to talk to doctors. And ask someone who's willing to really be your advocate.
Yeah.
And who knows how you make difficult decisions. Because there's no way that you could write every single potential medical option on your forms. There's no way you can imagine. The issue is, does my person know how I make hard decisions? And will that person make that decision for me if I'm not unable to make it for myself?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Being POA for both of my parents, knowing exactly what they needed, was so easy to say no, 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 no.
Right.
All the doctors, medical model wanted to do was to keep them hanging on and put them in the ICU. So it was so satisfying to be able to implement their wishes.
Right. Right.
There's no guilt about not.
And then there's no guilt. And then there's no guilt. My parents sat all 10 of us, no, 9 of us, Nancy wasn't there, sat all 9 of us down at, they almost had us captive. Okay, kids, you're gonna hear first before we eat. And it was very clear, I do not want a feeding tube, period. And I thought, I always said, I'm not gonna have a feeding tube either, ever, because mom said no. Well, then I watched Michael Cronin go through his cancer without needing a feeding tube, but a friend of mine, John, went through the same head and neck cancer treatment, and he needed a feeding tube. I think, I don't know if I'm gonna be Michael Cronin or my friend John. If I have a head and neck cancer and I can't eat, if I can get a feeding tube in order to have the nutrition as a bridge to wellness. Just because my mom said no feeding tube doesn't mean I'm not gonna have one. So I want my daughter to know that. Okay, so that's why I'm saying there is no right or wrong answer here. And you cannot put all of those things in your advance directive. Now, Betty's question also included, does it matter if the doctor has a MOLST order? It's pretty cut and dry. Do you want a ventilator or not? The answer is yes or no. And it's a matter of 5 minutes at most. Because that's, if you don't get air to the brain, you're gonna be brain dead. It has to be cut and dry. That's why if there's ambiguity and you come into the emergency room and your heart stops, they're gonna start CPR. It's far better, harder on the family, but far better for the person to start treatment and withdraw it than not to have it. Because then at least you have the option of life. There are some wiggle room parameters on the MOLST form. And it's not written in stone. If you're in the hospital and you want to make a decision differently than what you made the decision before you had this infirmity, you can still change it. I want to tell you about a story about Johnny Ligon. Many of us love Johnny Ligon. He was my last patient at Montgomery General, MedStar Montgomery, excuse me. They used to charge us a nickel. They teased us about charging us a nickel if you call it Montgomery General after we changed to MedStar. Johnny came into the emergency room and was moved into the ICU after he had fallen in the shower at friend's house. In the house that, is it no longer there? Or was it renovated?
It's still there.
It's still there, okay.
The sales house.
The sales house, right. And he had fallen the night before, taking a shower, and had massive bruises on his legs. There was no grab bar, he wasn't able to pull himself up, and he ended up being on the floor in the bathtub for 16 hours or thereabouts. It was very painful, and he had massive bruising. That kind of bruising, the body takes care of, if I hit my arm, black and blue spots go away. They do it by going to the kidney keeps working to clear out the blood and rejuvenate it. That kind of massive loading on your kidneys put him into kidney failure. And also he had some cardiac issues. In order to help the kidneys, you push a lot of fluids to be able to keep flooding to keep them moving out. It's a really good thing for the kidneys, but it's not a good thing for a pump that doesn't work well. So we were treating him in the hospital. He wanted full code, he wanted full everything. And then the doctor said, we might have to put you on dialysis. And at this point, Mike Clark came into the hospital and I saw Mike. I didn't know Johnny was there, but Mike came in, I saw Mike and followed him in, what's going on? And so I was invited in on the case to help out. So I said, Johnny, what's the matter? What's the most important thing to you? How do you want to handle this? And the ICU doctor had already said to me, and by the way, he said, please tell the story. This is not a HIPAA violation. The doctor had said, we don't know how this is going to work out for him, but he'll have more of a chance if he starts dialysis. So we sit down and talk, and I tell Johnny this. And Johnny's more likely to listen to friends than he was the doctor. That's common. So he starts dialysis. A few days in, he's doing a little better, but maybe not. Few more days in, more dialysis. He's, I'm not sure this is gonna really, it looks like he can handle it if he stays on dialysis. Johnny says, I don't think I want to stay on dialysis. I want to go home and sit in front of my big screen TV and have a party. And I don't want to be on dialysis. I really don't want to live this way. So I go back to the ICU doctor and I said, this is what Johnny's thinking. And she says, that's very understandable. This was a nursing mother, by the way. She was still close to that sense of primacy of life and the importance of nurturing. And she spent time with Johnny too, and she understood a little bit more about who he was, and she recognized this was important. I'll tell you, the person who really was angry was the nephrologist, because he was losing the patient.
What's nephrology?
Kidney doctor. So Johnny came home with hospice. And I'm just telling you that story because we all need grab bars in our showers, by the way. But also because when you're in a situation, you might change your mind. And that is perfectly okay.
You can change your mind?
You can change your mind.
An obvious question, so I'm glad it had the obvious answer.
Right, you can change your mind.
It's only if you are not of sound mind, and that can get to be an iffy question.
2 doctors to say you're not of a sound mind, that you're not decisional. 2 doctors.
And your family can.
And your family often knows.
Yeah.
And I've seen people go, oh, he's able to make a decision because he hasn't signed his will yet. So that's a whole other story. I recommend everyone get their will. Everyone gets their advance directive, everyone gets their will. Roger.
Yeah, you mentioned that there are opportunities to change your mind. In terms of, correct me if I'm wrong, in terms of an advance directive and that whoever you select as a power of medical attorney, and the medical power of attorney is supposed to kind of be guided by what your wishes are probably like, but they can assert their own wishes. Tell me if I'm wrong. They can disregard what they think you would want, and then change what should happen. In other words, there's wiggle room and there's opportunity for change in a number of ways. Not only the patient, but the power of attorney can also say, well, I'm not going to go along with that. I want him alive a little longer. And is that correct?
So Rogers just asked the question about, can your power of attorney or your healthcare agent look at or decide differently than what you've written?
Exactly.
And the answer is, that's not a very good power of attorney.
No. Not at all.
You know, your power of attorney is chosen by you to make a decision according to the way you want, or the way you would make a difficult decision. If you're incapable of making a decision, you want to be able to trust the people that you're leaning on to decide for you. And there are situations in the advance directive that it says, I want my power of attorney to decide exactly the way I have stated. And there's another check box you can check if I want them to decide the way they think is best, given who I am and that wiggle room I advocate for.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to tell you about advance directives, you do not, NOT, need a lawyer. And I advise you not to get a lawyer about an advance directive. There is stuff in there from a lawyer that is unnecessary and gobbledygook and doesn't make sense to the medical team who is reviewing it, who needs to have it. A very simple advance directive is available online from the state of Maryland.
Do you need a witness?
You need 2 witnesses that are not your power of attorney, better not to be your family.
Yeah.
Yes. But it is absolutely unnecessary to do an advance directive. It's not, and it's worthless to pay for it.
With a lawyer.
With a lawyer, thank you, with a lawyer.
Doesn't have to be notarized either.
It does not need to be notarized in the state of Maryland. In the BYM area, the only state that requires notarization is West Virginia. Does not need to be notarized. Your will should be notarized, but not your advance directive. Claire, go ahead. Okay, no, just, all right, just a facial, okay. Okay,
Well,
okay, she's got the floor, please. It's nice to have a social worker from hospice here.
in my experience on the hospice team that I was a part of, it was my role to make sure people had healthcare power of attorney. And if they didn't, I was the vehicle for helping them to fill it out and whatnot. Well, I can't tell you how many people never thought about it. And when I was talking to them, they'd say, oh, I guess my brother-in-law. Yeah, and it's like, well, have you and he had to talk about what you want? Well, no, I hadn't seen him in months. So just emphasizing that it's really important to have this conversation with the people that you want to be your agent.
Thank you. Do I need to repeat that? Friends on Zoom? Okay, thank you. Ellen says no, I can see one head shaking. Thank you. Okay. Friends, I have much more material that talks about some of the things that we found that we were sort of like, oh, wow, in the book that I will continue with next month. Instead of going into it now, we'll do it next month. Okay. I wonder, yeah, Michael, please.
This has been mentioned, but I want to put an exclamation point on it, that it's really important in preparing all this thinking and planning, that once you've made some decisions about this, that, and the other, that you call the family together. That family meeting is so important because I only have 4 children. I didn't have 9 siblings. I have 4 children. And they're a little bit different. And they have different concerns. And, you know, and they're all very intelligent, argumentative, and so I have this, quiet me needs to make it clear what I would like. I have good counsel at my side. And to talk about it, and then not in an argumentative way, but to teach them the path that I've taken at this stage in my life. And I hope that they follow what I am doing by communicating with them.
Thank you. Should I repeat that for anyone on Zoom? No,
You've got somebody with the hand.
I see Paul wants to say, but Joan's next.
To follow to Michael, my son is my power of attorney, but I instructed him in writing and in discussion that I wanted him to do that in consultation with his wife, who's a nurse, and the other kids, including my stepdaughters. I named the people that I wanted him to be in consultation with, and I talked to him about it, so.
That's a good point.
Now, whether he follows it or not, we don't know. But I was that explicit.
Right. Paul, go ahead.
Sorry, unmuting. Given that what I've heard so far are meetings in Frederick and Langley Hill as being at the core of what you're doing, I would strongly advise that you also check with the Palliative Care Division at NIH, the Naval Hospital Complex in Bethesda, Maryland. Especially if the woman who's still there, who I talked to many times, as a writer, there are some books that come out of there. Palliative Care Division at NIH. It's since 9/11, it's become one unit, both sides of the Rockville Pike. For me, it was a terminal diagnosis that didn't happen, so to speak, which is why I went there.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I think we've looked at some of them and I should go back. Thank you.
I think anything that emphasizes the difference between palliative care and hospice is also important.
Oh, thank you, Laura. I would like to clarify the difference between palliative care and hospice. Palliative care is the branch of medicine that is an interdisciplinary that works with any disease, any patient and their family who has a long-term chronic disease. And its focus is to maximize comfort, minimize suffering, to take care of some of the side effects of treatment, and to basically improve quality of life. You can get palliative care regardless of where you are on the disease trajectory. Hospice does the same thing if two doctors think that your disease is terminal and you're likely to die within 6 months. So it's sort of a subset of palliative care.
Yeah.
And anyone who has any kind of disease that's managed long-term is actually getting a type of palliative care, like insulin is a palliative medicine because you cannot live without it. It's not going to make diabetes go away, but it manages suffering. Now, in the world of medicine, no one would say insulin is a palliative treatment because it feels like that's a death sentence. And so I only bring that up as to help you illustrate, how broadly palliative care can be. Okay.
Thank you.
4 minutes, got it. 4 minutes? Thank you. Okay, well, so if it's 4 minutes, is there any other comment that has?
I have one question and I'd like people's advice on it if it's beyond this. I've heard people say they have one power of attorney, one medical care directive. I have 2 sons. And my plan now is to make both of them because I love both of them. One lives here, one lives in California. Is that a bad idea?
You know, I would, so the question is, should you have 1 or 2 or more healthcare agents? And I want to answer that offline.
Okay.
Thank you. I think I want to leave this here, is that what we have learned is that the aging and dying process that all of us will go through gives us an opportunity to deepen and broaden our relationship with the divine, if we so choose, and to live our values more concretely with coming to grips with the reality that our bodies will continue to decline, but our spirit can always keep soaring. As Pennington said, our life is love, and there are no bounds to that. This life is not the end of it all. And let us leave today with our life is love. Amen. Thank you.
Thank you. Amen.